Okay, guys, welcome again to the class. My name is Ivan Pineda, and you're a professor for international business and also finance here at FIU. Today we have from New York, directly from Manhattan, Dr. Jose Gonzalez. How are you doing, Dr. Gonzalez?
Good. Thank you, Ivan. A pleasure to be with you and your students today.
The pleasure is ours. I know that you are very busy. As a matter of fact, we were taking a look at your history just a little bit before this interview. I sent an email to the class in which I let them know who you are. So already by the time they're looking at this video, they more or less know a little bit about Jose Gonzalez. They know that you are right now a managing partner as GCG Advisors in New York.
Mhm.
And in the past, you were the director in different asset management organizations. However,
Mhm.
what they found interesting, though, is the fact that your background seems to indicate that you were going to a different route, but you ended up in finance.
Yes.
We know that you have a bachelor at the University of Lima in Peru, journalism. Is that correct?
Yes, I major in journalism, minor in film, and I was a professional journalist for 8 years in Peru and Colombia. And I used to cover the guerrilla warfare movement
Wow.
in Peru, the Shining Path, and the M19 in Colombia. And after that, or during that period of time, which was between 1983 and 1990, more or less, I also cover the drug wars in Colombia and Peru and human rights. I was also human rights advocate. Uh, and that's probably what my communicating skills come through. I come from a family of journalists and publishers. My father was a journalist. My grandfather was a publisher and a bookstore owner and a print shop owner. And my brother is a journalist. And I have uncles that have worked either in journalism or they're professional printers.
Oh, wow. So after graduating from journalism with your bachelor degree, then you attended a university in the United States. You went to Columbia. Am I correct?
No, first I major in journalism and a minor in film, and in fact I work in two films as a scriptwriter in Peru. And my first experience was at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. I got a fellowship from the World Press Institute, and I was a World Press Institute fellow at McAllister College in St. Paul. And I did a full academic year in U.S. studies. It was basically an academic period at McAllister, followed by a traveling fellowship all over the U.S. We spent 9 months traveling all over the U.S. After that, I lived in Europe for a while in southern Spain, went back to Peru, finalized my BA. I dropped out of college. I mean, that was nonsensical. I don't recommend to do that, but I did because I became a professional journalist and I was so involved and it was so exciting and I was making money and having the time of my life. And I went back to school because I wanted to do. I wanted to pursue an academic career. So I graduated finally from Universidad de Lima in Peru, and I attended. I was accepted and attended UC Berkeley and the PhD program in sociology. I was at UC Berkeley for a year. I did all the academic work, the academic law, which is short. It's not that much. Basically, in those 7 years in sociology, you spend 1 year in class, and the other 6 years basically preparing your research, your comms, your thesis.
That's correct.
And after at that point, I realized I didn't want to spend 7 years researching and investigating. I'm a practitioner in every sense of the word, and I realized I wanted to go back to the world, and I want a more scholastic kind of education rather than a research. In a PhD program in my cohort in Berkeley, we were 12 students. There were more professors at UC Berkeley's PhD program in sociology than students, which is it's great. But the whole dynamics of seminars and research is very lonely process. I mean, to be an academic in this country and sociology is a quantitative science, which it was good for me because you have to take advanced statistics, which was later very useful for finance. And then I transferred to Columbia, in which I got a master's in international affairs with a concentration in Latin America. But I focus also in international political economy. I didn't graduate with that mention because I didn't do the coursework, but it was something that interested me a lot. And in both at Berkeley and at Columbia, I study inflation because I came from Peru at the time of Alan Garcia's former Peruvian president that committed suicide last year, and because of an investigation on corruption. And I lived through hyperinflation. So when I did all my studies in sociology were in social pathologies. Why societies get sick and what does that mean? And in Colombia, I developed all my academic work was in inflation. And I was very happy at Columbia. It was the time of my life. It was exactly what I was looking for. And upon graduation, I found a job in finance, and that's when I switched from journalism, academia, into finance and investment banking, which is what I've been done for the last 27 years. So people keep telling me that once a journalist, always a journalist. I said, well, once a banker, you're still a banker, even though I was a journalist. I've been now for most of my career an investment banker than any other thing.
That is incredible. And by the way, Dr. Gonzalez kept helping theory and academia because I see that you are part of the advisory board for Columbia's University Institute of Latin American Studies.
Yes, I was the founder of the advisory board of ILAS, and I'm still a member of ILAS and founder of the Greater Caribbean project. We funded a line of research in which we consider the Greater Caribbean, which includes Venezuela, Colombia, not only the islands, but that, and I also was part of the advisory board of the Institute of Latino Studies at CUNY, and I'm also in the advisory board of the World Peace Institute at St. Thomas University in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Impressive. So now you tell us all about your background. And actually, you answered 2 or 3 questions that students had right here. The next question, and I think it is very important since they are taking this particular class, international business, is how is the area of international business important for you and what you do every day?
For me, particularly, I mean, I was born and raised in Peru, educated initially in Peru. I came from a southern town in Peru. It's either a small city or a big town, which is called Arequipa in the mountains in Peru. And then I did my college studies in Lima. And then I moved from Lima directly to St. Paul, Minnesota, then to Spain, then back to Peru, and then to California, and then to Columbia, New York City. And I've been in New York City for almost 30 years now. So I'm mostly a New Yorker at this point. And I was part when I was graduating from Columbia and I was looking for a job back in journalism, but I was very curious about finance. Economics has been something that caught my attention a lot since I was an undergrad student. And when I did my studies in Peru at Universidad de Lima, our education was very scholastic in the sense that it was very solid in humanities and broad studies that you have to take as your core classes, which, I know it's more and more flexible along the years, but it's very useful to take macro and micro, and I took introduction to accounting, which is extremely useful. I tell every kid that goes to college, take classes in accounting. It's going to be one of the most useful things you're going to do in your life. And we used to take introductory and intermediate math, short to calculus, but that was the way it was done. And we took statistics and probability, logic, and all of those things make sense to me. So economics was always big among my interests. And that's what I focus in inflation is when I was doing sociology and when I was doing my master in international affairs. And then when I was looking for a job, I couldn't find a job as a journalist. I almost was hired by ABC News to do research for a magazine, a TV magazine, but it didn't pan out. And then by a series of accidents, I found a job at Baring Securities, which at the time had just opened in an office. Baring Securities was a British merchant bank that invented emerging markets in Southeast Asia. The first emerging market ever was Japan, 30 plus years ago. And they just opened an office in Mexico, and they were opening an office in Argentina at a time in which Argentina was running 3,000% inflation a year. So they needed somebody that understands inflation that could help them understand Latin America. And when they hire me, they say, we'll teach you finance, you'll teach us Latin America. And I told them, I'll learn first. It's easier to learn finance than Latin America, and that's the way my banking career started. And I first went to Argentina, then went to Peru, Colombia, Ecuador. I was going to Venezuela, but then Hugo Chavez coup happened, so I couldn't. I was flying from Bogota to Caracas, could never do that. And since then, I've done business research or investment banking operations all over Latin America, all over Europe. I was based in out of not based, but going in and out, commuting to Hong Kong for 2 years during the Asia crisis. So I've done business in Asia to a certain degree, and I cover every single crisis in the emerging markets since the tequila effect in Mexico in '94 to the dot-com bubble of 2001, and now the COVID in the US. And our expertise is emerging markets. So everything is international now. There's a lot of talk about deglobalization. Yeah, in certain way of globalization and the way we conceive it, but the world cannot be deglobalized. Since Christopher Columbus or Marco Polo, I mean, the planet is global, and it can go back to not being global, even though certain parameters of it might or not be reformed.
So, what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities for organizations and individuals who are in the international business area right now? Well, evidently, taking in consideration the COVID-19 situation.
I mean, what I realize is when I know about finance and I learn a lot, and I can do a lot of things related to finance, but I'm not a financial whiz. I mean, I work in large banks for a big part of my career. Then we launch a hedge fund. Then we launched GCG Advisors, which is a corporate finance boutique. We do investment banking, similar to what Greenhill and Company does. We're a pure corporate finance boutique. We don't do sales, we don't do trading, we just do structurings, both fixed income and equity, and we do mergers and acquisitions, we do advisories, we do all kinds of funding, securitizations and such. We like, because it's like a craft, and we like the craft of putting a deal together. Now, most of my partners have MBAs. And they have gone truly through finance and their financial whizzes. I was never a great financial analyst. I mean, I built financial models, but my models were pretty weak. While I have one of our partners that graduated from an MBA from MIT, he's a financial genius. I mean, this guy is really beyond belief. Now, I understand exactly what he does, but I cannot do it. How does that happen? I know how to use my iPhone, but I cannot manufacture an iPhone. It sort of works the same way. And all my partners along all these years, I've been an investment banker for 27 years, they always say, how do you understand? I have a great intuition based on a very solid education. I approach finance since I did advanced statistics in my PhD in sociology, because in the US, sociology is a mathematics. Social sciences in the US are quantitative compared to Europe, in which they're qualitative. If you study sociology in France, you're more a philosopher than a sociologist, as the way we conceive it in the US. In the US, if you cannot prove it quantitatively, statistically, it doesn't exist. So I approach finance as applied statistics, which in fact it is correlations, covariations, ratios, but then you have to make your brain work that way. So my strength was not on the financial part of it or the structuring. We have other partners that work in the structure, the legal work, the fiscal parts of it. I run the deals. I know to run a deal, finance is a universal language. A model is a model is a model. An Excel sheet depends its sophistication depending on the sophistication of the analyst. But this is the same sheet in Buenos Aires or Sao Paulo or Hong Kong or New York or Iowa. What is imperative if you do international business to understand the culture in which you're going to? I always tell the associates at our firm, if you want to close the deal, don't pay attention to the deal, pay attention to the clients. The deal doesn't make the deal. The clients make the deal. The people makes the deal. I'm not interested in money. Money means nothing. I'm interested in the people with money and what they want to do with their money. What are their motivations? What are their expectations? What is that they're looking for? What are their ambitions? And that depends on culture. If you don't understand culture, you will never connect to anybody. You would never close a transaction. You would never enjoy what you're doing. And to connect with culture requires beyond generating returns. And that's what the international part of anything you do, it plays a big part. And to for people to like you and respect you and have a dialogue with you, they have to know that you know who they are and where they come from. So you have to do a lot of research, but not only with your brains, but also with your heart and with your soul. I mean, if you want to understand Venezuelans, you have to love them in a certain way, which is not easy. Anybody that is married or have kids or parents or brothers, and we all do at some point, knows that those processes are complex. Uh, but in that complexity, there's a lot of satisfaction. So you have to be open-minded and try to understand them rather than understand you. There's another thing we always tell to associates: listen to your client. Don't listen to yourself, listening to your client. Take you out of the equation, open your eyes, open your ears, connect, and then with things start happening.
Couldn't have said it better. I have experience in the area of investment banking, and what you say is fundamental. Fundamental. Definitely, sometimes we take it for granted, but understanding the culture, and understanding and listening to what the client is saying, definitely is the key. 100%.
Yeah.
So we are going to skip some of the questions that you clearly have answered. But one of the things that the students, and I would say maybe 20-30% of the questions were related to this is, okay, now we're in a situation, there's Main Street versus Wall Street. The economy technically is not growing that fast. It's actually contracted. But we have a stock market that is increasing every day, essentially. Um, what is the role of the Fed in that? Do you see that the Federal Reserve is going to keep pumping the market up, essentially providing some liquidity whenever it's necessary? If that is going to stay, what our students should do, taking in consideration that there's this discrepancy going on.
There's, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it started in 2008, 2009, and it hasn't ceased to exist. It's what is called the Fed put. You cannot fight the Fed. Once the Fed goes into the equation, what can you do? I mean, and the Fed has done what they learned to do. I mean, most of the Fed presidents have been academics that have studied the Big Depression of the 30s, and they sort of realized that what went wrong in the 30s is very still difficult to understand or explain. How did the Big Depression come to be, and why it took so long to fix it? Which tells you about the complexity of economics and the market, which has to do with society and people. It's not about numbers. If things would be about numbers, everything will be so easy, isn't it? And people are not complicated. People are complex. Complicated things are mechanical things. Something breaks, you fix it. People are not broken. They're just complicated. If you read President Trump's niece book that was just published, you start understanding the complexity of this human being that happened to be our president now. Doesn't mean you have to like it. It gives you another piece of understanding. And in this Black Lives Matter discussion of our past and our original sins, we started understanding the complexity of why this country came to be to what it is. So in that very same scope, you have to understand the complexity of the markets. And what happened then, I mean, based on that experience of this big depression, is that the Fed realized in 2008 and 2009 that the whole system could collapse. And Obama said it at the time. He took over the White House, the nation, the administration of the United States at a very dire and difficult time, because all of this happened when Bush was basically leaving. And when he rescued the bank by bankrupt the auto companies, he said, the auto companies, it's an easy problem to solve. There's 2 million people, we fix it. And it was fixed. I mean, a few years later, it's just working as normal. So the problem, if we let the banks collapse, we are the banks. Everything is the banks. It's like the circulation in your body. If you stop the circulation, you die. So what the Fed decided to do, contrary to what happened back in between 29 and 32, is to give massive liquidity to the system so it couldn't collapse. So what the Fed does, the monetary stimulus is like the lubricant in an engine. What lubricant does, it keeps allows the engine to keep moving. No lubricant, the engine collapses, it fuses, you lose everything. What fiscal packages are like gas into a tank. That's what makes the whole thing out. It's useless to have a vehicle well lubricated and with gas if there's no people using it or being transported. At the end of the day, you're saving the people, neither the banks or the fiscal situation of the country. And that's what the problem has came to be. These monetary stimulus have kept the economy going. We haven't had inflation or currency debasing based on this monetary stimulus of 2008 and 2009. We don't know if we're going to have it in this cycle after the COVID situation improves in 2 or 3 years, which is, it's when it take the pandemic is going to be over one way or another in 3 years. That's what pandemics last, because either we got a vaccine and we can vaccinate most of the humanity, which is going to be very difficult and titanic, but we might, or we all get sick. Once we get herd immunity, 60, 70, 80% of the humanity gets infected. It will be catastrophic in terms of lives lost and constant disruptions for the next 3 years. But once that happens, a lot of things are going to happen. But what the Fed has done with these monetary stimulus is avoid the system to collapse. Having said that, the system is not working at its full capacity, and it won't, no matter what the Fed does. And you see it in the banking results of this quarter and last quarter. Provisions in this quarter are larger than they were in the first quarter. The banks keep losing money massively. And if you see the banks that have Wall Street activities like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or Citi, you realize that they're compensating the losses on their portfolio through trading. But those banks like Wells Fargo and the regional banks that have no trading are losing money. And that is really what is reflecting what is happening. Having said that, what the Fed does with these monetary stimulus, they don't buy your bad loans or your bad positions. They swap them for treasury bonds. So I give you treasury bonds so your balance is solid, and you give me your bad paper, including mortgages and bonds from bankrupt companies, which, the only thing that the Fed hasn't done is buy stocks. They did it in China. They did it in Japan, and it didn't work. So we don't know if the Fed is going to do it. The next thing is throw money from helicopters, as some economists said. But what happens is that what the Fed says, I'll do the swap, but you cannot do with those bonds whatever you want. They're not yours. I'm just swapping them. Yeah. Whatever I have in my balance sheet that doesn't affect me because I print the money is happening to yours. But I'm just giving you time. Is what the European Central Bank and the European Union did to rescue Greece. What they do is they intervene Greece immediately. They bought all the Greek loans in the private banks, put it in the European Central Bank, avoid a collapse of the European financial sector that was overexposed to Greece, gave time for Greece to fix their mess, which took 10 years, and things were fine. Now, what is going to happen in 3 to 5 years? It's going to be complicated. If demand comes back, if we recover levels of normalcy in the economy, whatever the new normalcy is going to be, we might see this time what we didn't see in 2008 and 2008, which is the basing of the dollar. After the deflation we're experiencing and we have experienced, and the fact that there was no inflation or the basing is because the economy globalized. We import labor. We import cheap labor. That's what it makes this country work. That's why it didn't see the basing or inflation in the previous. What we might see it in this next cycle, because the packages are massive compared to what we saw in 2008 and 2009. So it's a big risk that the Fed is running and Treasury, but there's no other thing to do. Because the opposite or the alternative is it's much worse. So it's going to be very uncertain in many different ways, and the economy as we knew it's not going to recover. Is what the economists call the 90% economy. Even if we recover 90% of the activity, it's still not working, because in a capitalism based on consumption, which is what we developed in the second half of the 20th century based on the American model, That 10% is a margin. If you don't, if we don't back to 100%, we're not gonna make any money. And most likely, we're not gonna go back at 100% because the pandemic plus the quarantines, the global quarantines, have damaged the way we operate it permanently. And on the other hand, all of those that defend, stand, and die for the free market should just, look themselves in the mirror. This is not a free market. If this will be a true free market, the one that libertarians would like to see, the Fed would not exist, and we'll be in the middle of a massive, calamitous, irreparable, depression, which is not happening thanks to the Fed. And I think that has to be considered. And in this debate of the 20th century between classics and Keynesians, which the Keynesians won for most of the 20th century, with the classics and neoclassics turning to neocons and neoliberals, seem to have won. Now it's the Keynesians are coming back with a vengeance. But that's the way it is. Is what Nancy Pelosi said when they approved the $2.4 trillion fiscal package. And he said, what are we going to do with this fiscal spending? And she said, it's not spending. We're investing in our most valuable asset, which is the U.S. people, which makes sense. Now, we're going to have to pay for those bills. We're running a fiscal deficit that was at 7% of GDP to probably 21, and we'll probably go to 40% of GDP. And people ask, how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to pay more taxes. Everybody. I mean, that's happened in the 30s. And how are you going to pay taxes? Well, you're going to you're going to reduce your consumption the way it used to be. You're not going to use and pay your credit cards at rates that go from 20 to 24%. You're just going to pay taxes. So the whole the economic dynamic as we knew it is going to be resetted.
So in developed markets, based on what you're telling me and what my understanding is as well, we're going to see some lower growth numbers in GDP, obviously.
Yeah.
Some of the countries might experience a little bit of inflation based on increases in M2 or amount of money in circulation. Some of them might not even feel that, and they might even have very low levels of inflation. But the important part is that we will have a very low GDP growth number. So for our students, what can they do? Where is the opportunity for growth in their 401ks, in their retirement plans, in the normal brokerage accounts? Is it emerging markets?
Yes, I mean, if you look all the projections from the World Bank, there's one thing that Governor Cuomo said during the crisis, and remember, it seems so far away, but if you think about April, May, the center of the pandemic was New York City, and everything seems. I was having a webinar today, and there were some analysts out of Florida. And even though Florida now has more deaths per day, more infections, per day than New York, they don't feel it the way we felt it in New York, because this is a small island. It's 4 million of us in this tiny island, one on top of the other. So everything in this island is really intense. And whatever we feel, everybody feels. This is a contemporary Rome. And you don't feel it the same way in Florida, but the pandemic is gonna reset everything. I mean, most of the things, and what happens is what this pandemic has done, it has accelerated things that were meant to happen. The model of the capitalism model based on consumption, remember, 75% of the US growth depends on consumption. But consumption cannot sustain an economy forever, because consumption tends to create unequal income distribution and wealth distribution, which is happening globally. So just imagine that we're going to grow 3.5%, 5% a year at the turn. In 50 years, we have grown so much, and the rich have getting richer, and we destroy the planet, by the way, because consumption, 60% of the clothes we buy, we throw them away. And that has tremendous costs in terms of energy consumed, waste, recycling. It doesn't make any sense, see, to keep behaving the way we're behaving. So after the contraction we're going to see this year, which is much worse than expected, in June, both the World Bank and I was saying, Cuomo said, don't trust the investment bank's projections because there's a conflict of interest. Of course there is. I mean, they're trying to sell you paper, and that's okay. That's the way it happens. I always say, don't tear your clothes because people do what they're supposed to do. just choose who you listen to everybody and make your own conclusion. So listen to the World Bank, the IMF, those institutions that don't have a conflict of interest and might give you a better assessment. That's why the projections of the World Bank and the IMF are so relevant in this context. And both of them have made corrections to the projections to the worse in June based on what they did originally in April. And all of those projections have been rebased on the impact of the crisis on the financial sector, regardless of the Fed and Treasury and the European Central Bank and what each country is trying to do. So what we're gonna see is recovery next year. We're gonna recover what we lost, but not completely. By the end of next year, we have basically recovered what we lost. And by 2022, we start growing again, mildly, timidly. I mean, the US is going to go back to grow 2% a year because that we cannot grow that much anymore. We're too big. We don't produce much. We consume a lot from abroad. All of this chat about deglobalization cannot be implemented completely. We would build iPhones in the US that would cost $5,000 and not $1,400. Who can pay $1,400 for an iPhone 11 Plus Max? Very few people. I mean, 5,000 is even less. The luxury market is having massive contractions, and it's gonna get worse because, I mean, luxury is bought by an aggregation of value generated by chains of production and purchase that are not happening. So, but as you mentioned, Ivan, I mean, the impact on the recovery of developed markets is gonna be worse than emerging markets. But that's a tendency that was already happening. The global South is a bigger promise than the global north. Why? Because we have demographics are destiny, and the young populations of the planet are in the south, not in the north. And young people are those that produce and consume, and that's what the future of humanity is. Primarily in the global south, starting with Latin America, Southeast Asia, some parts of Eurasia, and eventually is in Africa. We are seeing the same situation demographically in China and in Mexico and in Peru and in Brazil than in the Japan, US, and Europe. Not in Africa. Africa is still, and it's not a coincidence that the origin of humanity, it's its destiny at the same time. And that's what is called the reposition ratio, the mother reposition ratio. What is a reposition ratio? A woman has to have 2.1 kids, babies, so we replace the couple that originates those babies. 0.1 is the mortality ratio, and not all women have kids, therefore that compensates for that. In most countries now, it's below 2. In Africa, it's 7. So the biggest pool of humanity in the world, and demography, we're gonna reach peak demography at the end of this century, and after that, it's gonna decline. I mean, humanity, if things go the way they're supposed to go, we're gonna start disappearing, and would disappear in the next 2,000 years. It's gonna be a long, long, long process, and we still have a way to go from the 7 billion we are right now to the 11, 12 billion we're gonna be, but then it's just gonna decline. So the future is in the emerging markets. Once again, we're gonna grow more. Having said that, it's not the same kind of growth that we see in the US or that we see in Europe, but those have limitations, and the pandemic has shown which those limitations are in terms of demographics. And the only 2 economies that grow this year in the world are India and China. And there's no coincidence that they'll grow because they have a large population which is still under basic income levels, which is expanding. The middle class in China is expanding constantly, the same in India, and they have the means of production. So they can produce to generate what is the virtuous cycle of economic growth. What happened in the US in the 19th and 20th century? When you do develop, when you use your own financial resources and your production resources. Now, if we produce little and we consume much, we allow for development in other regions. Now we're protesting because the Chinese are taking advantage of us. Well, we took advantage of the British at some point in the 19th and the early 20th century, and we allowed the Chinese to take advantage of us. So it's not their fault. I mean, whose responsibilities? And the Chinese are doing what they were supposed to do. And the fact that the virus started in Wuhan, China, is as much a responsibility of us than them, because why there was this industrial and urban development in China that invaded terrains of wild animals, that created this zoonotic process that allowed the virus to become global. It was because we were demanding things on a cheap basis to consume in the US that were produced in the Hubei province in China. So it's a link. And that link, we're paying for that way of growing, which is not the most reasonable, environmental, or sensitive one. So going back to your original question, yes, the future is in the emerging markets, and it's still in the US. I mean, the US, we're still 330 million people. It's terrible what is happening with the pandemics. What people don't understand is, on a relative basis, the pandemic is going to kill a minority of us, but that minority is too much. And it not only puts our health system under stress, but death is death, as Governor Como used to say, and death is something that impacts all of us, because we all gonna die. It's just a matter of time. We don't just want to die now, and not from COVID. But if we are not aware of that, if we don't, if our humanity is not bring about in this pandemic, and we become more we develop solidarity with one and another. And since it's global now, it's not only regional, federal, national, but global solidarity. We're not going to solve this thing.
Dr. Gonzales, you said, and I quote, these things have accelerated what was bound to happen. When I see that statement, it takes me to the last question that I had for you today, which is, taking in consideration we're working from home, this might be the new normal. Things are changing fast. Automation is happening undeniably. If you track the ETFs that follow automation, they have grown tremendously in the last 3 or 4 years. We expect it to keep growing. What do you think that our students should do? What are the skills that they need to acquire as somebody that owns a practice, somebody that has been both the academic side and now in the practitioner side? What are the skills that you guys that are outside want from students? Is it
with technology taking over big chunks of our lives, with artificial intelligence coming, and it's unavoidable. There's things that machines do better than us, and they're not that much value added. I think what is going to happen, and again, I mean, regardless, even in the worst scenarios of mortality and victims, the majority of us hopefully are going to still around for a while. So there's going to be potential. And do remember that humanity have faced worse crises in the past. I mean, for any given perspective, this First and Second World War, the Holocaust, the Cold War put so much pressure and created challenges that are that we can hardly imagine. I have the fortune of having known in Peru survivors of the Holocaust and Americans that fought in Second World War, and the stories they never told because people didn't like to talk about them. And the little they talk, the little they said, and all the things you feel, they said that they went through something that we could barely imagine. I mean, in my first visit to Israel, when I went there for 7 days and stayed for a month because I didn't want to live. And you understand, regardless of the criticism you might have with Israel, and you go to Yad Vashem and understand what all of these came from, the pain, the suffering, the tremendous hope that make people create things that exist from nothing, based on nothing. This challenge is bringing us, it's hard, but it's not that hard. It's not that dramatic. You know, we're at home and talking over Zoom, and we have money to pay for Wi-Fi and electricity, and we have aid. We're not in Berlin in 1945 or you know, or London in the Blitz in 1930, in 1940. You know, we're not in Austria in Kristallnacht. It's bad, but it's not that bad. Let's put things in perspective. So with technology, artificial intelligence, and the strains that we're gonna have and we're gonna learn from, I mean, suffering make us strong. That's the key. You're gonna have to acquire new skills, and what this pandemic should bring and we're seeing it in the social protests that I think we're gonna see resets and breakthroughs that are tremendously important, especially for this nation. I mean, it seems that finally we're gonna end the the legacy of having declared independence without emancipating the slaves in 1776, which is something we have carried with us for almost beyond 2 centuries now, which needs to be solved for this country to do the next jump, which what Lincoln did when he created a nation through the tremendous hardship of the Civil War. But what the challenge is for young people now is to invest more and more in their formal and personal education, because the human talent, what is human, is going to be so valuable going forward into the future. Technology and artificial intelligence and machines can do a lot of things that our processes do. I mean, during the industrialization, work was manual. That has disappeared for the good. Robots can assemble cars better than humans, and it's less strain if you have invested in your education and your skills properly. So things like culture, as we were talking earlier, like intuition, like creativity, like imagination, are gonna have so much value going forwards. And it's so human in the way we humans are supposed to be. We have the chance now to exploit our talents. I mean, 200 years ago, we were closer to horses, and mules than humans. Now we're closer to humans, which has its pros and its cons. So that kind of skills are going to be important. Now, having said that, it's not enough to have a talent. It's fine to have a talent. But if you don't have a trait, and if you don't have a officio, how do you say officio in English? If you don't
Like
have
profession.
a what?
A profession?
No, you have a talent, you have a profession,
Okay.
and you have a trade, and you have a craft. You have to have a
Yes,
craft.
that is
I
right.
always say I'm a biker by profession. My craft is of being a communicator. That's what I do. I'm very good at it. But my vocation is I love aesthetics. I'm a perfectionist. That's I'm always aiming for something that is aesthetical, from a Excel model to a PowerPoint presentation to a client to a plate of spaghetti. So you have to define that as a person. What do you want to profess? What do you want your craft to be? And what is your vocation in life? What is that makes you feel alive? They're three different things, but they're part of a whole. Without a craft, you're going nowhere. You need character to develop your talent and make a profession out of your life. Without character, which is to do what you like to do, what relaxes you. I mean, I tell people, I mean, if you see Wall Street 1 or 2, that's not investment banking. That's nonsense. We spend most of our time alone in front of a computer, in meetings, in calls. It's a craft. I mean, in my case and in my partners and associates, it relaxes us. I mean, working on a model and a presentation is very relaxing, but for the hours you dedicated to it, your brain goes blank. That's a craft. Without a craft, there's no way you would develop your vocation or your profession. Because the craft is what you're going to do most of the day after day after day. And if you don't have enjoyment in that craft, it's going to be unbearable. It's like getting married, isn't it? I mean, it's not about going to Venice every day and having, it's a routine. It is spending time. And when you love somebody, you want somebody that witness your life, and you witness the life of that other person. But it's on a day-to-day basis. You wake up together with your hair up, and you have to brush your teeth and put your clothes, and if you don't love that, it's not a good marriage.
That is
It's
right.
gonna be the same in your profession, and that's the craft of it. If you don't develop a craft, you would never realize your full potential.
Guys, you cannot get a better interview than this. Seriously, Dr. Gonzalez, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We hope to have you back. We have to
Anytime.
have you back.
My pleasure. Good.
Guys, thank you for everything and for watching. If anything, you can follow Dr. Jose Gonzalez on Twitter or and LinkedIn, Dr. Gonzalez. We will have you back. Thank you so much.
Anytime. I hope to visit you soon once this thing is over.
Absolutely. Come to Florida.
Good. I will.